Do you know the word we started with here, Mahat? Is that in the Ratana Sutta, the previous verse, or is it somewhere else?
It's in verse 6
Oh, verse
of
6.
it's the last word in line 2.
Oh.
Etesu dinnani mahapalani.
Okay.
So etesu, among them, meaning
Yes.
among the people we've just
Yes.
been discussing.
That's right.
Dinnani. Dinnani. What does dinnani mean, Veronica?
Oh dear.
Okay, you often chant that word thousands of times, but in the form of adinna. Adinna, adana is adinna.
Is it actually something about against generosity?
Adinna means ungiven. Dinna is given, just what means given.
Yeah.
And adinna is the ungiven. And the adana means taking. So
Adana.
So adinna adana, which then becomes by something adinna adana, means ungiven taking, meaning the taking of what has not been given. And it's a participle, past participle, meaning that which is given, or adinna, that which is not given. And it can make a neuter noun, so dinnam is something that is given, therefore a gift. And dinnani is the neuter plural. Dinnam singular, dinnani plural. So so meaning things given or as gifts. In fact, it does so happen that we're just about to move on and have a look at lesson 8 in Lily da Silva, which is this very point about the neuter plurals. So I'll read it through once more and take any queries or comments. So ye puggala atta satam pasattha chattari etani yugani vanti te dakhinaya sugatassa savaka ete sudinnani mahaphalani idam pisanghe ratanam panitam etena satchena suvatti. And you have got the hotu, haven't you? The meaning of the u at the end rather than e, hoti and hotu. Whenever you have a verb, you know what that is. What's the difference between hoti and hotu?
I remember you mentioned this last time, but I don't remember.
Right. In the third person, singular and plural, the verbs ends in a t. Bhavati, hoti, in the plural, bhavanti or honti, means that they are. Very conveniently, to make that into like an imperative, may something happen, you just change that e to u. So, whenever you are chanting bhavatu sabbamangalam rakhantu sabbadevata, you'll change. If you say all blessing, all goodness is, that will be bhavati sabbamangalam. If you're saying if you're saying all the gods protect or are protecting us, rakhanti sabbadevata, that would be a statement of fact.
Yes.
But if you want to make it into an expression of a wish, may this happen, you change that T to tu. And there you are. It's as simple as that. That's why you say bhavatu sabbamangalam rakhantu sabbadevata.
It would be you are blessed, may you be blessed.
It means may bhavatu sabbamangalam, may there be every kind of blessing, all blessing. Rakhantu sabbadevata, may all the gods protect you. And at the end of each verse in the Rakaras, etena satchena suvati tu. It's the tu. May there be. So may there be well-being by this truth. Etena satchena. By this truth, suvati hutu. May there be well-being.
Is it by this truth?
It's the instrumental, the ena form.
Okay,
So the edena sacena by this truth, by virtue of this
by
truth.
virtue
reason
of it, by reason. of it.
By literally just by this
Because
truth.
of, it's not the same, is it? It's sort of,
Sorry?
it's like, it's not because of this truth or through
It's not
this
really, it's
truth.
not,
It's by this truth. It's just interesting how the truth, the blessing is dependent on the truth in some way. But by using that, by this
you
truth.
could actually put it like that, yeah, because we're saying by this truth, by virtue of this truth, by means of this
By
truth,
means of
or just by this truth.
Yes.
Suvati Hutu.
I think that's where sometimes whether you call it the imperative or whatever, all these various declensions, it does give that nuance of meaning, because I've always noticed that when I've seen the translation about by this truth. And I just wondered, what does that mean really? Because you could say just have this blessing rather than by means of this truth have this blessing. Do you see what I mean? Bringing in the dependency of the blessing on the truth of the teaching. By this truth, they will be blessed.
Yeah, but it's basically saying the aforesaid truthful words, and
Yes.
by reason of the
The truth of that, those
by
words
reason
beyond
of
it,
those
or
words,
this truth.
may there be,
Yeah,
may there be,
that's right.
be blessing.
Yeah, this referring to what the verses talked about.
Etena sacena, yeah,
Yes.
by this truth.
Yeah, that's good. I get it.
Meaning the immediately.
I just thought it meant truth in a broader sense, but by the foregoing truth. Yeah, that makes.
I mean, I suppose. No, it's specifically etena sacena, by means by this truth. I think that most likely to refer to the words immediately
Yes.
preceding. And you know what sabaka means, don't you, Sam?
I think, is it the hearers?
Literally.
The hearers of the disciples.
That's right. So from the root.
I can't remember the root, I put it written down, so it was the meaning of, has some relationship with true.
It is true, yes.
Which is very similar to the flow.
It is, in fact, in Sanskrit, they could not be confused. So the root in Sanskrit is shru, means to hear. Sru means to flow. And it's from shru that we get, for example, the past participle is that which has been heard is shuddha in Sanskrit. And that's the one that becomes sutta, no, with a single T, sutta in Pali. And so many of the suttas begin, suttas with a double P begin, evam me suttam, thus by me heard, literally thus by me heard. That was by heard. From sru, we get, for example, from sru meaning flow, we get sroda, meaning that which flows, the stream. Pali, sutta, and sotapanna, a stream enterer, but literally a stream obtainer, one who has reached as far as, or has got to the.
So the root there is SRU for to hear, and then the root for flow is
This with this slash over the top,
Yeah.
it makes it a palatal
Sure.
shoe.
That
That,
means
that's the one meaning to
to
hear.
hear, and it's the
And-
same letters but different word.
This is through.
True.
Through. In fact, they're in Sanskrit, they're entirely the sh is written like that, and the s is written like that. So they don't do things like putting a slash on top or a dot underneath, like we do in the Roman script, because we've only got 26 letters in the Roman script.
Mm.
We don't have enough letters to represent all of the sounds, so we have to put the diacritics, the distinguishing marks. So just remember that for the Sanskrit speaker, these are two completely different sounds, shru and thru. And it does create some slight confusion in Pali occasionally because they've lost the distinct, they don't have the sh in Pali, so it becomes a s. So you do lose that distinction, and it can occasionally create an ambiguity in Pali. Mostly the ambiguity is resolved from the context, but there are cases where it's not.
It makes a difference, doesn't it, if you put I call it an accent over the S and a dot over the S, because that's another sound, isn't it?
It is, yes.
So there's S and then sh.
Because we've got let's for example, let me give you another word. In fact, this will be a good example of how Pali can create an ambiguity. We have got the Sanskrit root dvish. That's with a dot under. The difference, the difference between the one with the slash over and the one with the dot under, it's not the distinction that's readily audible to the English speaking ear. The one with the slash over is the palatal sh, whereas the one with the dot under is a retroflex sh.
Where you put your tongue, isn't it?
It's where you put your tongue. I think most of us can recognize the difference in da and da. There's da, the characteristically Indian pronunciation. And there's the dental one, the retroflex one. The tongue, when you're pronouncing a shu or sh sound, the tongue goes in the same places where the j starts, j, sh. Whereas when you're doing a sh, the tongue curls back a bit, so it's called retroflex. The tongue curls back slightly, and it comes at the point of articulation. Is where the d and d come out. So dvish means to hate, and you've got the root dush means just to be wrong or corrupt or faulty, and that's where we get our dukkha from. So in Sanskrit, dvish makes a noun, dvesha, meaning hatred, and dush makes a noun, dosha, meaning a fault, anything that's wrong. And these are two completely distinct words in Sanskrit, and they could never be confused. By a slightly unfortunate historical etymological accent, both of these words, dvesha and dosha, come into Pali as dosa. So we all know the trio, lobha, dosa, moha. It's that dosa. So lobha is greed, dosa, ill will, anger and ill will, and moha. when you see dosa in Pali, it's mostly the one from dvesha, meaning hatred or ill will. But it is occasionally there with the meaning of dosa, meaning just a fault. I mean, if there's a fault in the engine of your car, you see, your engine doesn't have any ill will. On the other hand, it does have a dosha. But in Pali, it would still be a dosa. Something has gone wrong. That is one of the potential points of ambiguity in Pali, which one is meant. But mostly it would be evident from context. And you so often see them given as a trio. Anyway, Lopa Dosa Moha says you know that it's from the Lopa Dvesha Moha in Sanskrit. So Angie, I can see that you're bursting to recite this verse. Great attention to the doubled consonants and the long and the short vowels.
This was what you said to me last week.
Is it?
Yeah,
What did I say to you last week?
you wanted me to do it last week. I remember.
Anyway, have a go.
So the same verse that we just did.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So the one Yasudala
Yes.
Atta Sata Asata Chattari Ekani Yugani Honti Te Dakineya Sudatasa Sawaka Tesu Dinani Mahapalani.
Right. Say much more clearly, Dinani, with really holding that double note, Dinani.
Dinani.
Right. And I mean, sometimes people ignore it a bit, but it is really important when you're chanting in unison to hold these double consonants to length, otherwise it's slightly out of step with everyone else. And apart from the fact that it can give the word a different meaning as well. When I say dinner and dinner, can you detect the difference easily? Dinner, dinner. Because the word dinner actually means day, whereas dinner, as you know, means given. Sam, would you like to?
Ye Pukala Atta Sata Asata Chattai Vitani Igani Honti Te Dakineya Niya Sugatasa Savaka Etesu Dinani Mahapalani.
That was pretty good. You can say dakineya. Right, so you've got the clearly doubled cut and the clearly doubled yo, the dakineya. One point to note, probably spotted it by now, is when you have an aspirated consonant, the next sound after it, which is doubled. So you have, for example, atta, as in karaniyam atta kusalena, atta meaning the objective or the go. It's treated as a doubled aspirate, but notice that the h is written and is pronounced only after the second one. So, for example, they'll be written differently as well. So This is the in Devanagari. That's a T. So I'll write it better. This is a T. And this is a T. Ta, ta. And when you write them together, you just merge them like that. Sorry. Not that we're doing Devanagari script here, but I'm just making the point that when you get a doubled aspirate, dakina is another one, double KH. It's treated as a double K, with the aspiration, of course, only after the second K. It would be virtually impossible to aspirate the first one anyway. So ta, double T, then the H comes out. Dakineya, the double K, then the H sound comes out. And the same with Mahapalani, Pala, Mahapala. So the first P is an unaspirated. When you double it, the first P is an unaspirated P, and written as such both in Roman script and in all of the scripts in which it's written in India and the East.
Then when you have a C, it's always ch.
The C is
Chatari.
yeah, that's pure spelling convention.
Yeah.
Because the Sanskrit has the K and Pali has the K and the Ch sounds. So just by pure spelling convention, it was just generally by general consensus, it came to be that way back in the 1800s among Oriental scholars who would translate, finding a standard way of transliterating into the Latin script. Say, okay, for the sound K, let's use the K,
yes.
And for the sound Ch, let's use the C.
C, I see.
So it could have been anything.
Yeah.
But in fact, in the Devanagari script, this is the K sound, and this is the Ch sound. The K and Ch. In the other class of the Buddhist society, you still get people who've been there for such a long time. Still, some of them just can't quite get it.
The ch.
Can't open their suppress. It's a K. Akara, so anyway, there it is.
So in this Roman, using the Roman alphabet to represent Pali, most letters are represented by one Roman letter with a option with these extra dots and things, but the aspirated one that's represented by two letters. Is that the only instance?
That's the only one where you actually use a digraph, that is, two separate letters to represent one sound.
That's weird.
And for example, we've got the so. So these are three entirely different letters in the Devanagari script. That's ordinary S. This is the palatal Sh. This is the retroflex Sh, which I was explaining earlier. And we have, for example, this is the very well written. This is the dental T. This is the retroflex. So you see they're entirely different symbols. So they are all, you're right, they are all represented by letters of our alphabet, but with diacritics, as the slash above, dots underneath, and so on. With the one exception of the aspirates, where it's just where would you put an H? In fact, they're entirely different letters in the manuscript, and the same throughout all the scripts of the East. I mean, I'm thinking of the Thai Burmese singular as well. Aren't you got the that is the sound of the dental the. But the sound that we represent as a the, as in Dhamma, Buddha, is it's an unmistakably different letters on it, with the written after it. So everything represented with diacritics, with the exception of the aspirates, we just wrote it as two letters.
Almost like the H is like a diacritic itself. It's like
It is as if actually that's what you could treat it whenever you get an H following a consonant, you treat it effectively as if it's a diacritic. That's a very good way of putting it, actually. I hadn't thought of putting it that way. That's very good. I like that one. I'll use that in future of my other classes. That it's not a separate. It is a kind of separate sound because the are different, but you can treat it as a diacritic, which is causing the aspiration of the preceding consonant. And no ambiguity is ever caused because under the rules of Sanskrit and Pali, you never get a consonant immediately followed by a consonant H. And there is the separate sound H, of course, we know that exists. But it never, in Sanskrit or Pali, as a separate sound in its own right, immediately follows the consonant. It's always either at the beginning of a word or between vowels. It never follows a consonant in the same word. And that's why you can't get any ambiguity about it. So whenever you see a consonant by an H, automatically and always the H is the way you nicely put it, Sam. It's treated as a diacritic, marking the aspiration. Had you had to go at reading yet?
No, that's very difficult for me, actually, I'm sorry to say, because I find it difficult reading the text. With these bifocals, so rather give it to me. That's why I need a light and everything. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll come maybe with the best one. This is the trouble. Oh, dear. I've been practicing as you've been going around.
Would it help if I recited it? Recited it pada by pada.
Yeah.
Okay. Ye Pugala
Satanam. Pasata.
And remember, that's a doubled T.
Pasata.
And it's aspirated pasata.
Pasata.
As in upta.
Yeah.
Upta kusilena pasata.
Pasata. Jatari. Etani. Yugani. No.
You correct, you got it right first time. Yeah.
Yugani. Yeah.
Kunti.
Kunti. Te.
Dakineya.
Sugatasa. Sawaka.
That's very distinctly da.
Yeah.
Sawaka.
Etesu. Dinya. Is it? I want to say Dinyani.
It's an ordinary dental N.
Yeah.
Dinani.
Dinani. Maha. Now we've got the double P, haven't we?
Yeah, and the preceding A has been short, so normally it would be Maha, but it comes Maha because of the following double
Yeah.
Mahapalani.
Mahapali.
Mahapalani.
Mahapalani.
And here we see the phenomenon, of course, of the adjective agreeing with the noun. So Mahapalam, literally grapefruit, is an adjective meaning of grapefruit, of great benefit, bearing grapefruit. It has become an adjective qualifying dinani, neuter plural, so it has itself to go in the neuter plural. Is dinani amahapalani. And we see equally the savaka, singular stem form is savaka, as in savaka sangho, the assembly of the sangha of the disciples. And it's savaka, this is the plural, nominative plural, savaka.
Savaka.
And that accounts for the dakineya, which is again masculine nominative plural, giftable, worthy of gifts, worthy of honorable gifts. So what we could do, any comments or queries or doubts about that verse I can deal with, then we can move on to a little bit of grammar. Super.
Might have to go and share somebody's.
I'm just looking on my phone.
My battery's pretty low, so
I downloaded it.
yeah.
So
What are you using there, Sam? Are you using your phone?
Yeah.
Well, I'll try mine then. You just put Billy De Silva in the search, don't you? You usually get it.
Yeah, I put PDF. And then it came up.
oh, is that from the PDF of Linda De Silva that I circulated to the group a while ago?
No, it was just online. It was just a search online. You get the whole book downloaded as a PDF.
Yeah. I know I have a feeling I should have circulated it.
You did. The copy I got was from your email.
Oh,
Was
yeah.
it?
And that was it, the whole book
Yeah,
in
yeah.
PDF form.
Yes.
Okay, right.
Or at least the link.
Pali language level 1, is that it?
I think primer, I think it.
Okay.
Which lesson are we looking at?
So we're looking at lesson 8. Lesson 8 deals with actually three things. It deals with the vocative. That's just the form that you use when you're addressing somebody by name. It also then just summarizes the endings of the standard masculine nouns ending in a. It just summarizes them. And then in paragraph 3, that's on page 28, it looks at the neuters. Neuters, in fact, are very, very simple. Because they're exactly the same as the masculine, except for the nominative and the nominative and accusative, and have a different ending in the plural. But for all of the other cases, the neuter declines exactly the same as the masculine. It's only in the nominative and accusative that you have to learn different endings. Now, I've mentioned stems. Did I send to you a video, a YouTube video that I did years and years ago called Roots and Stems?
Yes, I didn't watch it. You've shared that before, hasn't
I have, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And in the in the online Pali group that's due to be starting in September, where we've got large numbers. Therefore, there's got to be a little bit more orderly. There will be certain things that are going to be required advanced listening, required advanced study. And one of the things is roots and stems. And I think I had a strap line. It's like roots and stems, what they mean and why it is important to understand them. Words to that effect, I think. Anyway, have you all got the concept of what a root is in this context? See,
So root is like the kind of ancient kind of meaning.
it's the in form. It is the irreducible form of typically of a verb. And that bears within it the basic meaning, and then the meaning gets expanded for number, person, tense, and with prefixes and suffixes, all these extensions of meaning, but always bearing that same basic meaning.
So could you have a root that was an Indian root and another one that was a European root? Or is there some kind of universal ground in which they all are rooted in?
There is.
Because they're called Indo-European languages.
So it's the Indo-European roots, which have been reconstructed by scholars over the time. Some of them are still a little bit tentative, but most of them have been reconstructed without too much difficulty. And the way you can reconstruct these roots is you look at all of the languages that are descended from Indo-European, and you can do a reverse engineering on them. So you take the earliest known form, for example, of the Slavonic language, which is Old Church Slavonic, going back to over 1,000 years. You can look at ancient Greek, or Homeric Greek, which is the earliest known form. You can look at Latin. You can look at how Sanskrit and Pali have developed into the vernaculars of modern India. You can see how Latin has developed into French and Spanish and Italian, Portuguese, Romanian. You can see how Gothic, the oldest known form of the Germanic languages, has developed through German, Dutch, Scandinavian languages, and English. So you can see how they've gone forwards in time. So what you do, you kind of reverse engineer, you see how that process has worked, what mutations there have been. Then from the earliest known form of the language, you can put those processes in reverse. And there's a very high degree of convergence through known rules, from which you can reconstruct the ancient.
It's a reconstruction of the root, isn't it? Rather than an original form.
It is. Occasionally there's a little bit of doubt, but mostly it's accepted what those forms are. And there's a high degree of consistency when you get an Indo-European root, which then you can see how it's developed through the Slavonic languages, into Latin, into the Germanic languages and English, and into Vedic, and then Sanskrit and Pali, and then the languages of modern India. For example, you get the Kna, or Bno. You get these I'm not sure if that's the exact form, but anyway, it doesn't actually matter for these purposes. You get in Vedic Sanskrit, you get the root nya, meaning to know, and you'll often find there was a gnya sound in Sanskrit. It's often a gna in Greek. So you get the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge, and you get the gnoscere in Latin, as in cognoscere, cognition, cognoscere, that's gno there.
And in the Sanskrit,
And it is the
To
nya,
know.
nya in Sanskrit, which just becomes a nya in Pali. So Sanskrit for knowledge is in jnana, but in
Yeah.
Pali it's jnana, knowledge. And then come through the Germanic languages, then as far as English. The kno, so gna in Greek, gna in Latin, kna in English, nya in Sanskrit. And it becomes for example, the root for to know in Russian is zna. So you get nya, kna, zna. And by tracing all that backwards, you get to the Proto-Indo-European form. And many of them, once you get used to looking at it, you say, oh yes, you can see the roots of your own language there. And it's normally fairly sharply delineated in
I presume all the Asian, like Chinese, the ideograms and maybe Korean.
oh yeah, I mean that's
All
true.
as a different development altogether.
It is, yeah. I mean, they just belong to an entirely different language group.
It's funny, when you talked about roots all this time, I'm afraid that, to be honest, I have this vision of an ancient past, perhaps prehistoric, when they spoke like, very basic sounds to each other. Because they were didn't need a lot of language, and I thought that's what it was, to be honest.
Well, no,
That it sort of went back in time to
it's
some
actually pretty
early form.
very sophisticated because, for
Yeah.
example, the Proto-Indo-European, we go back between 4,500 BC.
That's right, yeah.
To the when the Proto-Indo-European languages have been spoken in what is now Ukraine
Yes.
and the southern Russian steppes. Go back to around 1800 BC, which is only 2,000 years after we know this Proto-Indo-European language has been spoken in Ukraine. Go back to 1800 BC, and we've got the Rig Veda. And we know the Rig Veda is phenomenally sophisticated in its language,
Yes,
very, very highly developed grammar. And it's just impossible, and nobody's even suggesting it. It's impossible that the Proto-Indo-Europeans have spoken with a series of oink oink grunts. And just 2,000 years later, a mere 2,000, blink of an eye in the history of mere 2,000 years later, we got the sophistication of the Vedas. So although they didn't write it down, although their tools were somewhat primitive, the language was very well.
The spoken language was very, very sophisticated.
They were pretty sophisticated. And they weren't that stupid. I mean, they managed to, the reason the Indo-European, those people called them Indo-European, simply because of the languages they spoke. But one of the reasons they were so successful in conquering other races is that they were the first to learn how to tame the horse. They invented the wheel and then a combination of the wheel and the horse, you see, you get the war chariot. If you've got tame horses and war chariots, it gives you a bit of an edge of more primitive people.
It's like having weapons.
Do not have tamed horses and war chariots.
So the route for chariot is shared about horse and wheel. It's awesome.
I'm glad you asked.
It's chakra, isn't it?
Chariot.
So I can give you what they are. I'd have to look them up to remember in my head what the roots were. But we know that in Sanskrit, we get the root char. Square root sign, mathematical square root sign is to get the root. This char is anything to do with going or moving. And it's where we get the English word. And in fact, our English word car is just a shortened form of carriage, which is from that same root char. You find a lot of ch flipping from one to the other as the Indo-European languages developed. However, The actual word for chariot is a different one. It's rata. So the Sanskrit for chariot is rata.
Did you say it was to go, the car?
Char means
The first one, char,
the basic meaning is just simply to go.
to go, like,
Mm.
just to go.
Now, the rata,
R80.
or rata, which is an aspirate, is the word for chariot. It came into Latin, rota, meaning wheel, as in rotary, rotate. So the original meaning of rata was just actually a wheel. And then by extension, you can talk about something, I don't know if they do it anymore, about your wheels, meaning your car. So the wheel by extension in Sanskrit came to mean the chariot.
So in Sanskrit, so Rapta, that's Pali.
So, sorry, say again.
Can you repeat that?
Okay. Rata, and it's the same in Pali as well. Rata has come to mean chariot, but in an older stage of the language, it just meant a wheel. And it's in its meaning wheel that it came into Latin as rota, meaning a wheel, and from which in English we have rotate, to go around like a wheel, and rotary. In fact, when you have a rota of people doing a certain work, it's a wheel. You go round on a wheel, your turn, that's why it's called a rota. As for the horse in Sanskrit is ashwa.
A-S-I, is that?
It's the S with a slash, so it's the palatal ashwa. Now,
A. Yeah.
ashwa.
Mm.
In fact, in Pali, a regular phonetic representation, it's asa. We'll just look at these Sanskrit word ashwa. You find very, very frequently that a sh in Sanskrit becomes a k in Latin and or Greek, which is exactly what has happened in the present case. The Latin for horse, vowel changes this, so the Latin for horse is equus, ashwa equus, the sh becoming a k sound, and written as a q simply because there's a u following it. So it's from we get equine, so ashwa, equus, and our equestrian, equine, from that same root.
This is slightly away from that, but it's something I've been meaning to ask. This, when I was all those years ago studying the Vedas at uni, there was a word. No, there was a word called it was ritar or it was RTI, but it had. I'm sure it had.
There's rita and ritu.
Ah, but it meant it was meant to be a fundamentally key concept underlying all the thinking, which was to do with a sort of order or
Yes.
harmony or something, and to maintain the order and harmony of the cosmos, all the sacrifices and everything. And it kept referring to this word, which was a strange word, like it didn't relate to anything else. And I just, when you had it there, that's why
That's what you may think, but I
yes.
shall.
Okay.
I shall try to demonstrate otherwise.
I don't know what it relates to in Pali, I'd like to know, because it was the whole structure of the rituals and everything was to maintain ritar without, and what if that broke down, there was chaos, you know.
Without it, you get chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
what is it? What is
actually,
it?
we can take a little tea break.
Okay,
And we can
maybe
look
just
at
the
the-
meanings.
Because this is actually one of the most fascinating of words.
No.
How about tea break?
Tea break.
Turn off the tea break. Record, pause.
Because it's a key term in
Yeah,
Greek.
the ritu becomes utu in Pali, but I'll explain that. We've got this root. To go.
That's another to go, isn't it? Another one for to go.
There are several gallant and this root, or rather, first of all, I should say this the subdotted R is a vowel.
Oh.
Is it it was either pronounced as an or a in Sanskrit, but it's the syllabic R. For example, in Serbian, so by the way, the Serbian for heart is srce, and it's two srce as the syllabic R. Anyway, this r or r means to go. And it's a highly productive word because if you add the suffix ta to it, ta is a very common suffix making a verbal noun. For example, from the root sham, meaning calming, in Sanskrit you get shamata, which is the Pali summer-type. See? Now, if you root plus ta, strengthen the guna of the root, you make artha, it's the same. So a going, artha, which in Pali becomes atta, karaniyam atta kusalena, and atta means a goal or a destination. Where there's the artha, you're going where you want to get to, your destination or going. By the way, I think, did you write Ashwa? Put a V after Ashwa. And in Pali it's double.
Oh, right, that makes more sense.
Now, let's make a past participle out of the and we get rita. The going, the way things go.
The way things go.
The way the going. Literally just the gone and then the going, the way things go. And then the natural order of things. And if something is bad and wrong, you can negate it. Amrita. With the negating kusala, akusala, like that. Remember that because this is a vowel, the negating a before a vowel becomes an. In exactly the same way as it does in Greek and then in English. Anaerobic, anorexia. So amrita, so just bad or wrong, not in accordance with the order of things. Now, from the same root, also meaning a going, put a tu instead of ritu. So ritu, which in actually Pali becomes utu. I said Pali doesn't have the rit sound, so just put in another vowel and said, like amrita, immortal, amata in Pali, mrityu, death, machu, Pali. So ritu, utu. But look at this ritu. So ritu actually means a going, then by extension it means a season. The seasons, or those movements whereby we can measure planetary progress, the progress of life, the progress of the year. So it came to mean things like the seasons or important planetary events, or the ritus, things like the like
Full moon.
the equinox, the solstice, the full moon, these are all the natural goings,
Natural
the
goings.
natural goings, the natural order of things.
Yeah.
And you had to have your ceremonies to keep your own human life in balance with the gods. Now, this is where it gets quite entertaining. This is where it gets quite entertaining. Because we have this ritu. Do you spot any connection between ritu and ritual?
Oh, right.
It's the same word. So from the Latin ritus is exactly cognate with the Sanskrit ritu. And the ritus, the rites of the church, rites and rituals. Ritual is the adjectival form of the rite, R-I-T-E. It's that same word. So it's these special ceremonies that you have to keep human life in balance and harmony with the divine life, the cosmic life.
That's right.
It's all from the movements, the planetary movements, the movement of the earth, movements
in
of life.
in the natural world.
In the natural, so you keep yourself in harmony with these bigger forces.
Yes, it seemed to be so essential, but what happens in Pali? What do we have a Pali word that means?
Okay, so ritu becomes utu in Pali.
Yeah.
This concept of something in Sanskrit, rita and anrita, which means basically in harmony and correct in accordance with the Dhamma. I don't think that's come into Pali. I don't recall seeing it. And in Pali, the utu has become an ordinary word meaning a season, as in the seasons of the year. So basically that same meaning. The movements of the year, the observable seasons. But I don't think this more transcendental meaning.
That's why I was interested, because most of the keywords in the Sanskrit Vedas have a corresponding one in Pali.
Mostly they do. I'm going to double check this one.
It's just it's like divine, or like all those things you said, that and the rituals were intended to maintain them. That's why if they didn't have the rituals, the harmony would be lost. It went with Vedic rituals. So maybe there is no rituals. There isn't.
Yeah, of course.
A corresponding.
Buddha rather downplayed the importance of the Vedic
that's right,
rituals. Basically, saying that's not what it's all about.
Yes.
Maybe that's why these words weren't transposed into Pali. I'm going to double. I've just been vaguely in my mind, ritu is utu in Pali, but just to follow through, I think I'm right in saying that they haven't turned up in Pali with that same importance of meaning that they had in Vedic.
Because we have Dhamma, haven't we, in Pali, but that's not quite the same as this.
It's not quite the same. The root Dhamma, sorry, the root Dri. It's actually from a root Dri, which is aspirated with the and this. And the essential meaning of that word is firm, holding and firmness.
Oh, right.
And that which is established, firm and solid. So the original meaning of dharma is that which is established and firm and solid, a bit like in Chinese, the Tao, the order of things. So and one of the meanings of the word dharma is the law, but as in the laws of nature, the transcendental laws, the way things are.
See, I think in Pali, I don't really think the word Dhamma, which is so fundamental, has a lot more significance and layers of meaning
Oh, goodness.
than it does
yeah.
in the Sanskrit, because the Sanskrit dharma, which is really more about rules and duties and regulations that guide one in life. But the Buddhist notion of Dhamma is somehow the essential truths. It's sort of like, it is a deep, true reality of life, you know, or whatever, not just of life, but you know, that which is fundamentally true.
That which is fundamental, that was a
Rather than
fundamental,
just,
solid thing, like,
yes.
so in Sanskrit, it had this meaning of, well, one of them was one's own personal law.
That's right.
In the Bhagavad Gita,
Yes.
for example,
Yes.
Arjuna's duty,
Yes.
he called Arjuna's dharma,
Yes.
was to fight,
Right.
you know,
His
but
caste
But,
duty.
yes, it was his caste duty, it
That
was
was his
described
dharma.
as his dharma, I will be in breach of my dharma, which was an unthinkable thing to do.
Right.
But that was the law, like the natural law into which he fitted, in which Shri governed his actions. By the way, this dre makes dharma, and the dharma to dhamma is just a regular
Just
phonetic mutation. Dharma becomes a double ma in Pali. It's etymologically the same word. So it's the same underlying idea, but was then taken to a higher level.
Well, taking
in
refuge
Buddhism.
in the Dhamma, I mean, it's sort of, it is a high, more transcendent
That's right.
concept than it is in Hinduism anyway.
It certainly has, I
Yeah.
mean, I agree with you. I think
Yeah.
it has been elevated to a higher status in Buddhism. For example, the Dharma Shastrani in Sanskrit, and the law books.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Manu.
The Manu,
Yeah.
the laws of Manu. And either way, this as a verb, it simply means to hold.
To hold.
As in, I was just telling you earlier, Jutindharo, the holder of light, the bearer of light. Also, making a verb in Pali, dhareti, meaning to hold. It comes to mean remember, just remember what I've said. Dhareta, dhara of what I've said is hold it in your minds. So that's just the original, and it's the idea of that which is held firm and solid. The Greek, the dra became a thra in Greek.
It's
So the word thronos, from which we get our English word throne, as in the king's throne, is the seat of firmness, like this established solid seat. That was the
establishment.
The establishment, the original meaning. By a curious quirk of historical phonetics, there's the sound d in Sanskrit or in Vedic sometimes turns up as an F in Latin. It did on a scale.
I'm just trying to see what it would make.
Okay, so let's say, from this word dharma, that which is held firm, the dha became a f in Latin, and it actually gave us the word firmus in Latin, meaning firm or solid, from which we get our English word firm. And when we stand on terra firma, on firm land, solid ground.
Solidity.
So it doesn't actually look like it, but there are several words where this dha becomes a f, and the r and the ma, of course, remain as they were. The only change, ignore what happened to the vowels, they're very mutable anyway. So just look at the dha to the f. And adhara, meaning lower in Sanskrit, adhara became infera. Infra, inferior, inferno just means the lower, inferno just means lower, meaning the lower realm.
Well, we sorted that one out. It was just something
Sorted out
we
this
mean to
problem.
last for a while.
By the way, some of these routes some of them have what you call extended routes. They've got your basic route, which is a rip. And by an extension route, you get, for example, naughty. And it's in English, it comes through that as run. An extended form of this primitive root re. So our English word run comes from the same word as re. So run and ritual are actually etymologically from that same ancient root.
So were you going to tell us the difference between a root and a stem? Or are they the same?
I can do that.
I don't know, I know that was the heading of the chapter that we were going to look at in Lily de Silva, roots and stems.
The difference in a root and a stem.
No, it's sort of something
You
different.
know, in the Pali primer, is lesson 8 muscular detention?
Yeah.
Is that where we were?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a video, there's a YouTube video.
Yeah.
Okay.
Roots and stems.
How is that? Okay,
Yeah.
I will send out to you again a
I think
link
we
to
got
my
it, yeah, sorry.
YouTube video on roots and stems. So the word for root is the word dhatu in Sanskrit. Same as dhatu. And that word means an element. And it was an element in the same way that we use the word element in chemistry now. It's the irreducible thing. You break something down into its elements, you can't break it down any further. And so they believed then, but okay, that's true. Let's just assume it's right for these purposes. Like you can break down different metals into different elements, but if gold cannot be broken down or lead cannot be broken down, go right down to molecular level, and it's still lead. Although they hadn't got the chemistry back then as advanced as we have now, they got the principle right, the irreducible minimum of so you can't break it down any further. And that the word they use was dhatu, which in science meant an element, and it's also the same word that they use for a root, as in a linguistic root. So, for example, you've got let's take the root bru, meaning to be. So this tick in front of it is meant to represent the mathematical square root sign. There's just a convention among linguists to use that square root sign to indicate that what's being written is a root. So this bru, the root bru, which is actually cognate with our English word be, is a root in the sense that it's an irreducible minimum. You can't reduce it any further. You can build up the word further from that, but you cannot cut it down any further. Because you can't say that bru is from, but well, no, the root bru is irreducible. From this root, you can build up the verb bhavati. Who makes bhavati by break the u to other, that's a regular progression. And you can get past participle. Buddha. You can get a verbal noun. Bhava. Then you can get several verbal nouns. Also get bhava. Bhava, all fall from this root. By the way, this word, root word on itself, bhu. You maybe very rarely in Vedic, but it does not exist as a word of the language on its own. It's an abstraction. It's an abstraction. So and then you build up further. Bhava, and you put prefixes on, anubhava. Tasanubhavena, anubhava. And you get a causative verb. Sanskrit, bhavayati. In Pali, the ayati tends to be a-ati. So bhavayati. And then from ascending, you can make from that causative verb, you can make a verbal noun. Bhavana. Bhavana, you know, it's our word meaning generally meditation practice. Literally, it means from the causative, from bhu to be. Bhavati, it is. Causative, bhavayati, makes to be, brings into existence, verbal and bhavana. So making something to be or bringing it into existence, cultivation, either making be something that was not before, or increasing its being, therefore enhancing it. So you see, from the simple root, all these other words are built up normally by fairly regular rules of word building. So all of these are traceable back to bhu. But bhu, then there's an approach to an Indo-European root, but within the structure of Sanskrit and Vedic. That's not, you know, you can't break it down any further. That's what I said, that's the element. I mean, you can multiply this in infinitum from the root char. You get uchara, vichara, achara, acharya, which in Thai becomes ajar, all from the root char, charati, chara, vichara, all from that root. You very often find in Sanskrit and Pali, you get a root, and you then have variations of meaning with the different prefixes. So anubhu means either to experience or anubhava has the sense of charisma, that which accompanies your being. You have udbudha, which means beyond what is normal, therefore extraordinary. You have paribhu, which means to, the word meaning to hold somebody in contempt. You go around them, you don't even not notice their existence. Prabhu, your being forth, meaning the power or wealth. So you get, that's why you get, it's so phenomenally useful to understand the concepts of roots and prefixes to build up your vocabulary in Sanskrit and Pali. Also just to understand what these words mean. Give you another example of a root is, for example, this va. Root va. Do you know what the root va means?
It's not to see or anything. That's good, yes.
Va means to blow.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And it makes a verbal noun, a lot of roots.
Yeah.
You can make a verbal noun just by adding na, as in da, to give, dana, giving, you know. Vana, therefore, means blowing. Nir means out, so nirvana literally is blowing out, so that becomes nibbana. We have in Pali, in Sanskrit, it tends to become a double but in Pali, so that's why nirvana in Sanskrit becomes nibbana. But it literally means blowing out. As in, it began by an ordinary homely word, as in you blow out a candle. That's the nirvana of a candle. That's all it means.
So another word, is it vacha? Musuwacha, when we do the precepts. But the word is it VAC in Sanskrit?
Musavada.
Yeah, in Pali, in the precepts, Musuwada. That's,
Musavada.
yeah, but there's a word in Sanskrit which I thought was VAC, and it meant to. Does it mean to blow or to make to make wind off?
There are two separate roots.
And it's
One
becomes
is vad.
speech.
This is what you mean, and the other is vad.
Yes. Yeah, in Sanskrit, the word is to go. It's meant to be very significant again, this VAC, because it's the breathing forth of Brahman or something like that. I've come across this idea.
It's breathing.
But anyway, never mind.
Let's take the word
Yeah.
to breathe.
Yeah.
So
no.
from which we get prana and
Yeah.
pranayama.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
But there are several words meaning to say, but vad and vach are two words. Vad and vach mean almost the same thing.
Okay.
But the root vach, by the way, meaning to speak,
Yes.
comes into Latin as vox,
Of course,
which is the voice, and vocal, our word voice and vocal from this vach. And right speech is samavacha.
Yeah.
So this gives you the idea. Oh, by the way, now look, when I'm looking at this root vad here, take that as one example. You can make other words out. The word vad on its own, it's the root for a lot of other words, like vada, meaning saying, musavada verani. Vada just means saying. From that root, the word vad does not exist as a freestanding word of the language, but it's just the root from which other things will grow. As in, for example, Theravada, Thera elder, Vada saying in vaccination teaching. So Theravada is the Vada, the sayings, the teachings of the elders. So this deals with what we mean by roots. Now, a stem is something a bit different. Just take a root. Good. And that root, again, there's nothing particularly spiritual or esoteric about the root. It means two things: to be aware or to be awake. Let's now make a past participle out of that. We take the stem, we take the root, bud, and we add to it the past participle ending ta, which it turns up in English as our ed ending. By rules of internal sandhi, bud plus ta becomes buddha. So buddha is simply the past participial form of root bud, meaning to wake up, therefore awake, adjective meaning awake. Now, I've written the word buddha there, and that is the stem form. So what is a stem? That word now, if we want to fit that word into a sentence, then we have to start modifying it. Supposing we want to make it nominative, Okay, so the Buddha becomes Buddho. So Buddho now is specifically masculine nominative singular. Buddho. So from the stem, we call it the stem because it's a kind of base then. You have your root. Use rather horticultural imagery here.
Yes.
You have your root, and out of your root you get different stems growing. And from your stem, the actual flowers or whatever grow. So Buddha on its own, well, okay, it is a kind of word, but it's not quite a fully fledged word yet. That's how it's quoted in dictionaries, for example, in its stem form. So if you want to say the Buddha says in Pali, you don't say Buddha vadati. You've got to put it in the nominative, because now it's the subject of a sentence. It demands to be in the nominative case. That's where we get Buddho vadati.
It demands to be.
It demands, because Buddha vadati is just bad Pali. It's just, people would understand you, but it's just bad Pali. And if you want to say that you, for example, abhivademi, meaning praise, worship, you don't say Buddha abhivademi, nor do you say Buddho abhivademi, because Buddho is specifically the nominative. You've got to put it in the accusative. That's why Buddham abhivademi, Buddhang saranang gacchami. So that goes into the accusative.
The nominative is
Is
Buddho.
the Buddho, accusative Buddham, but formed from the stem in the short a. And if the instrumental, the Dhamma taught by the Buddha. Okay, the Dhamma that goes in the nominative because it's such subject of the passive verb. The Dhamma, Buddhena desito, Buddhena, so ena ending, meaning by the Buddha.
We had that before, didn't we?
We have.
By the truth, sort of thing.
Right, and so we have, for example, stem form satya, meaning a truth. Now, it's a neuter noun, so if you wanted to talk about the truth in a sense, if you wanted to make that the subject of a sentence, you have to give it its neuter, you have to give it its neuter singular ending satyam, which in the logo of the Republic of India, satyam eva jayate, satyam eva jayate. It is the truth that will conquer. There's that Sanskrit satyam becomes satyam. But on its own, you talk about just a satya. If you're just discussing the word or a dictionary entry, we're just discussing the meaning of the word. We use the stem form, satya, but let it function in a sentence, and then you've got to add to the stem the specific endings that indicate what case it is, your nominative, accusative, instrumental, and so on. And if you of the Buddha,
What was the by the Buddha? What was that?
ena.
Yeah, but I mean, is it instrument?
That's
Accusative.
called the
No,
instrumental.
The
Because by the
Retainer.
instrumental
By,
done
yeah,
by
instrument,
the Buddha. So the Buddha is the instrument of it being done. So Dhammo Buddhena desito, the Dhamma taught by the Buddha. Notice, by the way, when we're speaking in English, I said the Dhamma taught by the Buddha, and I use both those words in the stem form because I'm using those words when I'm translating it into English. So, but in Pali, you have to say Dhammo Buddhena desito. The stem Dhamma, Buddha, and the Satya. These are all the stem forms. That's kind of the basic form of a noun. Before you put on the endings, their case endings that they have to take depending on their function.
They didn't use the. There's no definite.
They don't. You can sometimes use a deictic like this or that, but as
Not
you have in English, but the article, the definite and the indefinite article, that they don't have. There are several languages. The Slavonic languages don't. Chinese doesn't. Not sure if Korean
doesn't.
Korean doesn't.
Yeah, makes lots of mistakes in English.
Yeah,
still.
it's the hardest grammar to teach, is the
That's right.
articles.
Yeah, for people,
Even for advanced speakers, they never
Yeah.
get it right.
for people who don't have it,
Yeah,
it's actually very difficult.
yeah, because the rules are so complex.
And they
to
are.
use it.
And for example, and sometimes it can actually change the meaning of what you say. If you were in hospital or in the hospital, these words have different meaning. If you say in hospital,
Yes.
the English speaker would, oh, poor chap, what's wrong? You know, he's in hospital. But if you're in the hospital, that's just a statement of what your location happens to be at that time. The taxi driver might be waiting in the hospital. And a lot of people just don't get that. And the difference, in the school and at school. Anyway, as you're right, and you must have seen that time people just, it's very, very difficult to grasp. In fact, it's just the Germanic languages and the Latin and Greek actually has retained them. But most languages don't have them actually. Even the languages other languages that developed from Indo-European, the Slavonic languages don't have them. Sanskrit and Pali and the languages of modern India don't have them either.
And they don't use them, and even German, it doesn't use them in the same way as English, even though it has antiqual.
Oh, that's right. And for example, and French.
Yeah.
So if we, for example, what's the difference in English between grass is green and the grass is green? You're making different statements. If in English you say grass is green, you make a general statement of all grass generally. If you talk about the grass is green, you talk about your particular lawn which had turned brown. It's like, the grass is green now. You're referring to a particular patch of grass. Whereas in French, for example, they say l'herbe est verte without distinguishing between those two meanings. So that's why I have a slight edge over the French there, because we make the distinction. Because when the French talk about grass, they talk about the grass, meaning generically grass.
We also have as well, don't we? The definite and the indefinite, and that's going to be important in communication.
It is, and
so
it is very important. In fact, it's a lenited or softened form of the word one. In fact, in French, in the Latin languages, they still do it. And in German, they still use the word ein. They still use meaning but although it originally means just one. So our English word originally was one, but was sort of softened. Now, these stems, this is the most common form of noun stem, is the one ending in a short a. In fact, of all nouns in Sanskrit and Pali, I think it's a little bit over 50% of this a stem. You get u stems as well. For example, I should mention before going on that when you're compounding words, as in, for example, the Buddha Dharma, the Dharma as taught by the Buddha, you use the stem form for the first member of the compound. So if the word Buddha on its own is being used in a sentence, you've got to give it its correct ending. Buddho, Buddham, Buddhasa, Buddhena. whatever it is. But if you talk about the Buddha Dhamma, you talk about the Buddha Dhammo, Buddha Dhammam. I am studying the Buddha Dhamma, it's Buddha Dhammam.
So the first,
So the first member of the compound, and in fact, it may be multi-member compounds. They generally, there are some exceptions, you can all about those now. They have the stem form, and it's only the last member of the compound that declines. So let's take this example of Buddha Dhamma, nominative Buddha Dhammo, accusative Buddha Dhammam, instrumental Buddha Dhammena. You see in all of those, I put the grammatical endings on the final member of the compound only. The Buddha in its stem form as the non-final member of the compound remains unchanged in its stem forms. And Buddha Dhammo, Buddha Dhammam, Buddha Dhammena, Buddha Dhammassa. So the A is the most common. But you get quite a number of words that have a stem in U, as in bhikkhu. And the accusative would be bhikkhu. And the instrument would be bhikkhuna. The genitive would be bhikkhussa or bhikkhuno. But if we're just talking about the word in the abstract, or using the word in English, what is the meaning of the word bhikkhu? You just use its stem form. And the same rule applies to compound words. So the vihara, the bhikkhu's vihara would be bhikkhu viharo or bhikkhu viharam. And the bhikkhu would appear in its stem form and wouldn't change. The grammatical endings would be added to the last member of the compound only.
would the same endings apply to the U nouns? You know, for the nominative and accusative.
Afraid you've got a bit of an extra effort of learning to come there. Not only that, but there are certain sim patterns that you can spot, but you have to learn them separately. And there's even, that's not all, there's more fun to come because you have a word like muni, Sakyamuni, meaning a sage, sage. It originally comes from the word meaning to be silent. So people who their spiritual practice was to observe silence. And then it came to mean a sage generally. So this word, this stem now, there's quite a range of nouns and adjectives. Shuchi is another word meaning pure, suchi in Pali, ending in an I. So it's the I stem nouns and adjectives. Again, the way they decline, you've got to learn them separately, but you will see repeating patterns. So, for example, bhikkhu, let's make it accusative, actually then the same as Buddha, just add an M, bhikkhu.
Bhikkhu, yeah.
Bhikkhu. And muni, again, joy, all you do is add an M, so munim. In fact, in one of our somebody's Sakyamunim Vande, in our chants, you have that. In the is homage to the 28 Buddhas, I think, in that one. I think it's Sakyamunim Vande. I pay homage to Sakyamunim Vande. And the genitive would be either munino or munissa. So you've got to learn them separately. But when you look at the tables, you will see repeating patterns that actually makes it a lot easier. It's not just random differences.
And we should just go back a bit. So we've got not in the nouns ending in A, we've got accusative is the NI, the nominative is O, the instrumental is ana,
Yes.
and I've got asa, and what's that?
That's the genitive.
Genitive.
Namo tassa, genitive and dative. Namo tassa.
Yeah,
Bhagavatu aratu samma sambuddhassa.
right.
It's-
So when it comes to the U ones, we've still got
You've still got a double S, you've got munissa and pikussa,
yeah,
which is,
Yeah, similar.
it's different in Sanskrit.
yeah.
But as I said, you'll find a lot of repeating patterns there. The best way to do it is to look at a table, of an entire declensional table, say of the nouns of any stem, either a stem, e stem, or u stem. And actually even more useful if you have a table of them with Sanskrit with the Pali right next to them, so you can compare throughout.
Is that the lesson 8, declension of masculine nouns?
This is the declension of the masculine nouns ending in a. That's what's been looked at in that lesson 8, but this is getting much too simple for the more advanced people now. This thing about the comparative table that sets out the differences between Sanskrit and Pali. I searched in vain for these, for anybody who'd done it. So okay, if nobody else is going to do it, I will. So I did, and they are done.
Oh, God.
And so I've set out, I've got, in fact, in 4 separate sheets, it will be how it is in Sanskrit, how it is in Pali, comparison of Sanskrit and Pali, and then another one that gives, merged boxes for similar forms. So rescue is at hand because these, ready reference sheets. When you're looking at these tables of declensions, ultimately you'll have to learn them. The ones that you really are essential to learn at an early stage are simply what's at the bottom of page 27 in Lily de Silva here. Just this, the declension of the paradigm word given as stem nara. And just how to decline that, singular and plural. That is just so common that has, say you have to learn that by heart at a fairly early stage. The others don't, better if you do learn them by heart, but all you need to do really is to know where to look it up easily.
That's right, nouns ending in I think I'm just looking in the Lily de Silva about what we've just been doing. Which one do you have to learn by heart?
It's the ones, it's the stems in short a.
Yeah.
That because they're just so common.
Yeah.
So it's and the equivalent feminine form in a. They're so common they account for more than 50% of all 5+9. They account for 50% plus of all nouns and adjectives in Sanskrit and Pali. So they've got to be learned. The rest, as I say, you will learn as you go along, but the most important thing is just to know where to look it up.
I think I'm getting the gist of it. The thing that I find intriguing, but I'm still not quite sort of natural with, is I've got nominative and accusative, and I now understand the instrumental is by.
Yeah.
But what's the genitive and dative, and what does that do to the noun sort of thing?
It means that the genitive is the equivalent of.
It's those words that I need, because the word genitive doesn't in itself say it.
It doesn't really.
We used to, when German, we used to remember it as belonging to.
Belonging to, because I
like
think
the
it's
man's
so
dog,
important
like that.
to know that meaning, because that's how you make the language, isn't it? It's not the noun.
Why is it accusative? It's just.
That's the
Just direct
object and subject of the sentence.
Why that word? Others are more obvious, like the instrumental is obvious by the instrumenter, something done through the instrumenter, the Buddha, by the Buddha. The locative in a place, that's evident enough. So stem form vihara, but locative vihare means in the vihara.
It's those, it's, what do we call those? They're not prefixes, what are they? Prepositions?
These are,
You know, be, why, through,
declensional
of,
endings.
through, by.
Okay, so we
Oh,
tend
In English, the preposition.
Prepositions, yeah.
we tend to use some prepositions a lot more than Sanskrit and Pali do.
Right,
So
I
simply
get it
because
now.
with the noun endings in Sanskrit and Pali, they usually indicate what their position and what their function, I should say, in the sentence is.
I remember learning Japanese and they didn't have prepositions, it was particles that were called.
Oh,
A list of particles to learn. Can't remember any of them now,
Mm.
but that was a few
and they
years
tended
ago.
to be postpositions.
Yeah, they
didn't
did, yeah.
So we talk about prepositions, things
Yeah.
placed in front of the noun.
Yeah,
Whereas in Japanese, actually Hindi as well uses postpositions. So the word for house is ghar in Hindi, and the word for inn is mein. So you don't say mein ghar, so ghar mein, house inn.
Mm. Yeah, because I'm used to declension of verbs, you learn that at school, you know, amarat or something in Latin, wasn't it? And, but declension of nouns was flummoxing me because, but now, I mean, you know, when you talk about prepositions, so you change the ending of the noun to include what would be a preposition. That's right, isn't it? That's why they're declined.
Very often, for example, we have, say, ghar, ghara, a house.
Mhm.
We'd say, if you want to say in
In
the house, you say in the house.
Mm,
In Pali, you say ghare, you
mm.
say to a.
Okay, which is
Vihara, a vihara, in the vihara,
Yeah.
in Pali, and Sanskrit would be vihare.
Now, which word is that? Is
That's
that
the
a
locative.
locative
Yeah.
location?
The
In,
location.
that's
yeah.
in, isn't it? Yeah.
But we have a remnant. We have remnants of this in English,
Mm.
in a few words. If you look at the word who, we've got the accusative with an M on the end, like in Sanskrit Pali, whom, and we've got the one with it as a sibilant sound, whose, meaning belonging to whom. So we have remnants of that in English. That's in he, him, his. So
Yes,
we've got
that's a noun,
remnants
is it?
there.
Yes, yeah,
But these are just remnants in a few words.
yeah.
Whereas in Pali, you know, you've got the entire set of
The
endings
words,
for
endings for
all nouns.
Yes.
But by the way, we talk about declining nouns, but conjugating. verbs.
Conjugating them. Yes, it just came back to me, there's something I forgot when doing languages
Yeah.
at school. You know, we would be given a sentence and then you sort of circled the noun, you know, each kind of word, that's an adjective, that's an adverb, and that's a gerund, and that's the subject, that's the object, you know, and you saw how it was constructed in that way.
We call that parsing.
Is it?
Parsing.
But they don't do that
I
anymore.
remember doing a lot of that anyway.
You take
And
each
that's
word,
where you have
analysing what's the
subject,
sentence,
object,
what's
yeah.
the ending.
Mm.
I've done it for you, by the way. No, see the sheet that I originally sent out.
I've only got some of them here, I've got all the ratons that are there, but I can't print.
I've parsed it for you in this box
Oh, yeah.
here. So
Oh, yeah.
M1P means
That's
masculine,
it.
nominative,
I
plural.
was just working that out.
Yes.
No, actually, I saw that.
I've got my
Oh,
separate
actually,
list
that
of
could be.
declensional
could be.
endings. That
Yeah, but I didn't
sent
know
out.
what all of them meant, the L and
Oh.
the P, for example, but that's, you've done it, oh my God. Now, if the penny's dropped. I mean, I sort of, but I don't know enough to work out what the L might mean, for example, that's locatives.
For the we
Or
use a
singular
number because
rather,
in
yeah.
Sanskrit grammar and same in Pali, they don't give names to these declensional endings, they give numbers.
Oh, I see, yeah.
So you've got the vibhakti in Sanskrit meaning division. So we talk about 7 cases,
Yes.
they talk about 7 divisions,
Mhm.
and they number them 1 through to 8.
Right.
Or another numbering, 1 through to 7 can be vocative, but there's 8. So for example, we'd say locative that they would talk about the, in Sanskrit, Saptami Vibhakti, the seventh division, which Pali is Saptami Vibhakti. So they always use, and I followed that in my parsing, so the numbers 1 through 8 follow that system.
It's very, what's the word? It's like solving a puzzle, isn't it? Somehow.
It is.
And giving you a code to map it out. It's that kind of thing, isn't it?
I have noticed that not all of my students have looked carefully at the parsing that I've done. In the Buddhist Society, when I do, there are a couple who be.
I recognise the
eager,
masculine and
pointing out,
feminine.
"Oh, you can call that 7 if it was 6.
Oh,
Sorry.
It must take quite a while to actually construct those notes.
It does take.
I can imagine, you know, it's so
It
detailed,
it
so
takes
precise, isn't it?
takes a long time to construct.
It
it. Which is why it gladdens my heart when I see the students actually reading them and understanding them.
Yeah, well, it was great with the suttas because, you know, the ones that we've done, the Ratana and the Mangala Sutta, with all your notes. It was great doing it, noticing it there,
Yeah.
fully appreciating it there.
So it's you can do it for ones that you know shortish, compact verses, but to take an entire long prose sutta.
Oh gosh.
You could do it, but I'll be dead by the time.
Okay, it's on
Okay,
time,
well,
isn't it? It's 10 past.
10 past 9 already. So we shall wind up the recording.